these types of networks where you put up a tower
We got this.
and you have your subscribers in different places,
It's okay.
and and you might have sectors. The typical cellular used to have this type of arrangement where you might put up a tower and you want to serve everybody in the 360-degree area around the tower, right? So you would think, so let's say that I did have this area, let's say I have a 5 square mile area. What would be your first thoughts about how I should cover it? What are some of the constraints on your mind of what I'm looking for? What are some of the things? Capacity, right? So one thing is, when you start out, you say, okay, in this 5 square mile kilometer, 5 square mile area, one of my constraints, one of the things I want to understand is capacity. Sorry. I want to figure out, well, okay, capacity. So how do I determine how much capacity I need?
How many subscribers?
How many users, right? So you need the number of subscribers or users, yeah? So from capacity, you need to know number of users, subscribers you can have. What are some other things that you would worry about when you're trying to figure out how to deploy this wireless network?
Obviously, coverage. Obviously, it's 5 square.
Yeah, coverage.
Maybe bandwidth. It might be that.
Bandwidth, yeah. No, it's related, but you're right. You get maybe we'll call it in here total bandwidth, and then bandwidth per user. Okay. So before, all they cared about with cellular was voice, right? So voice doesn't need a lot of bandwidth. Voice, depending on your decoders that you're using, voice could be as small as 50 kilobits per second, something along those areas. There's a lot of variation amongst them, but it's very, very small. So when you're talking about a megabit pipe, a 1 megabit pipe, you can fit quite a bit of those. You can fit 200 phone calls on a 1 megabit pipe, right? You can fit quite a bit. 20. You can fit 20 phone calls on 1 meg, right? 20 times 50, yeah. You can fit.
Well, you can use compression and stuff like that.
You can use compression. You can use all types of techniques. But if we didn't use any of those techniques, and we're just looking for raw, what you would need without providing any overhead or anything. But let's just say you can support simultaneous phone calls. You can support 20 simultaneous phone calls if this was what each phone call required. You can support 20 simultaneous phone calls with that type of a link. But we haven't even talked about something else yet. And you don't worry about this too much in the beginning, but you worry about latency when you pick your equipment. When you're looking to pick the type of equipment that you want to use for this deployment, right? So you want to understand the inherent latency that it has. So if a person wants to do this intelligently, they start looking at all of these things, and then they have to do one other thing. They have to understand the frequency availability in the area. What do I mean by frequency availability? Cellular is licensed, right? So people have those frequencies. No one's going to use those. They bought that spectrum. The folks who are using GSM or using whatever other. GSM is now the dominant cell phone standard that people use in deployments today for cell towers, for actual cell phone coverage, for the voice part. Before, there was always these battles between CDMA and GSM. GSM was the one that was supposed to be the protocol that's used around the world. It was the global system that was supposed to become the standard. In the early 90s, CDMA was still bigger, and then people were kind of banking more in the US on CDMA. Not a lot of GSM deployments were available. In Europe and other places, everybody was moving to GSM very quickly, and the US was kind of behind. And then the US now is pretty caught up with respect to GSM. Not too much different between them and the rest of the world now. Then on top of that, the evolution of data. Of course, people can get voice just using the regular network. But then when you start talking about data, the data needs, I don't know if there's anybody here old enough except for a couple of brothers and myself, who remember the old days of the modem where you would dial in just from your home, right? You dial in and you hear this weird all these noises, and you'd have to wait about 10 minutes to connect. And then when you did connect, you were very happy to have like a 14 kilobit, yeah, right? In the Ks, we were counting them in the Ks. 56K was like the fattest pipe that you could find. It was like really, when people got 56K, everybody was really, really happy.
Least line.
Yes, that was pretty much a least line at the time. I was like, man, this guy was riding high. So, 56K, we're talking, still only in the voice kind of quality type of data rates, not very high that people were able to get. So if we look at an area, and let's say, you had this area and somebody anticipated that here, they first looked at the houses in the neighborhood, and they said, okay, is there a lot of traffic here if this is a mobile network? They say, how many people are going to be here in these areas when this network is all done, it's fully built out? What do I expect in terms of the number of users that I'll have here? Will there be mobility between them? How many do I expect to have in here? How many do I expect to have in here? How many do I expect to have in these areas? And they might find, then they'll decide, okay, they'll start thinking, okay, so this is, we'll leave the phone analogy for a while and say that this is a data network. They'll say, okay, if there's no mobility between them, you look at the density of users that they expect. Are they mobile users? And if they say, no, there's no mobile, this is all a fixed wireless network, then they'll look and say, okay, where is my potential for subscribers going to come from? If it's something like a residential area and they're just trying to serve wireless internet to these homes, they'll look at the homes and they say, our penetration rate is going to be something like 50%. So they'll look at the residents. And there might be 100 homes in this area. They'll say, if we can hit 50 of them, that's where we want the maximum coverage to be able to, the maximum capacity to be for 50 users. Then they'll look in this area. This area has got maybe 30 users. Then they'll look at this area and they'll say this area might have 40 users. So then they'll start saying, okay, before they even sectorize, before people sectorize. Now I drew this as 3 sectors. But people don't decide to sectorize just as a standard, right? Normally what would happen is if I was an operator, what's your number one, why are you there? You're there to serve customers so you can make money, right? People are putting up these networks not just because they're nice people and they want to give people data balash who make people feel good. That's not what people are about. But if their customers feel good, they do end up making money. But what they typically would love to do, an operator would love, they would love to just put up one antenna here, one sector. They would love to just come up and put what we talked about last time is an omnidirectional antenna with one AP. He would just take one AP, one base station, and say, I want to serve everybody in this area. Like if you have an omni antenna is the guy who transmits the same power in all directions. So he might look just like this marker. He's a straight whip standing straight up in the sky. And the way he radiates, if he's standing like this, he radiates his power in this direction. So that no matter where you are, if I was speaking and I was sending my voice out through this microphone, and if it was a speaker, if it was an omnidirectional speaker, it would send the signal or the voice out to everybody in the same, and regardless of what direction you were in, you would hear it at the same power. You would hear it in the same level. So ideally, an operator would like to be able to come in and just say, hey, I'm going to put one radio here, and I'm going to serve everybody. I'm going to put it in the center of where I think all the users are going to be, and I'm going to place it somewhere in the center, and it's going to serve all the users, and I only have to use one base station. But then, a lot of times, like the brother was saying, if they didn't plan this properly, and they didn't think that they were going to have 30 plus 40 plus 50, if they didn't think they're going to have 120 users, if they had only planned for say 20 users with this Omni, and the base station would have a certain amount of capacity. Maybe the base station can only serve 100 users each, with and a total capacity on the base station might be only 50 meg. It might be able to serve 100 users. Maybe you can have 100 users on the base station. And under best case conditions, the capacity from a bandwidth perspective might be 50 meg, let's call it. That's more practical. For some of these cheaper base stations. Maybe you can only do 50 meg and you can tolerate 100 users. And at 100 users, each one, for the total capacity is 50 meg, and you have 100 users on there, each person's only going to get half a meg. Right, if you have 50 meg total capacity on there, right? So
It's shared. It's shared.
It's shared, exactly. So this is actually a critical piece, is that it is shared bandwidth, but if you had to plan for this type of network, you have to figure out what are the critical parts of the network where someone tells me that I must be guaranteed service. Let's say someone told me, I need you to guarantee for me that I'm always going to get 3 megabits per second at all times. Is it possible?
SLA.
What's that?
That's your service level.
Exactly. That could be the service level agreement that somebody comes to, and when they knock on my door, I tell them, look, I'll only get rid of Comcast if you can guarantee me that I'm going to have a committed information rate all the time of at least 3 meg. So if I make a lot of those types of contracts with this system that can do 50 meg, I can only probably do like 16, 17 of those, and then I'll run out. But it's a really interesting point that what do the operators do? They have what they call, just like what the airline industry does, these oversubscription rates. And every provider is comfortable with a certain amount of pain. That they're willing to tolerate a certain amount of pain, that folks would call them if there's a problem on the network, I'm not getting my 3 meg. How often am I comfortable hearing from my customer that he couldn't get his 3 meg? How often can I hear that? So sometimes what people would do is they would oversubscribe the network by a factor of 10, for example. It used to be that you can oversubscribe it by factors of 20 and 25 and 30 and 50. People would do crazy things. They would have a 10 meg pipe, and they would serve 100 users, or 120 users. I've seen networks where people have 120 users on a 10 meg link shared. Now, of course, like I said, if it's sporadic, you do your probability analysis and you figure out what is the likelihood that I will have enough users accessing the network at exactly the same time such that they exhaust my pipe. A long time ago, it used to be such that the probability was pretty low that a lot of users would be accessing the network at exactly the same time demanding bandwidth. Now, those probabilities are much higher than they used to be because we are everywhere with a device that does data. People are on their phones, people are on their iPads, people are on their laptops, people are on their home computers. I mean, in each home itself, we're starting to have conflicts, right? Because everybody's got like a Wi-Fi router. And to divert a little bit, because I think there's some useful information in it. We talked about this a little bit last time as well. Is that if you have multiple users on a network, as the brother was mentioning earlier, there's this access notion where it's shared, the bandwidth. But it has to do also with when you approach the network to get your data. Some of the protocols, the old protocols, were not so wise. They were using really simplistic methods to get people access. Whoever wants to talk, whoever has data to send, whoever wants to request data, just go ahead and request it. And there was a guy trying to manage that, the access point, and he says, if you have something to say, go ahead and say it, and I'll take you guys first come, first serve. And if there's a conflict, because two guys are trying to talk at the same time, it used to be a long time ago people were talking about having protocols. Well, just raise your voice and see who can get their voice through, kind of like a regular argument. I mean, people were taking their protocol and trying to figure out how to make things work. They would say, okay, let one person raise his voice, maybe the other person will back down, just like human beings. And then, people started getting a little bit smarter, and they said, well, let them both back off, and give them each a random number, like give them some kind of a hashed random number, and let them each come back with at a different time. Each person will have a different random number, and so someone will come back in 10 milliseconds, let the other guy come back in 12 milliseconds and try again. Because they both tried the first time and they arrived at the same time, and I couldn't understand either one of them because they killed each other, the signals. And then they tried again, but I told them each to back off a certain amount. One guy backs off 10, the other guy backs off 12, so I heard the guy who was at 10, and now the guy comes in who was at 12, and everybody's happy. So this contention-based type of protocol that I just described would allow them into the network, and as I said, in the homes today, you'll have 5, 6, 10 devices in a single home, from the desktop to 2 or 3 laptops. Everybody's got a smartphone in the family. So you can have a lot of devices and everybody contending for that bandwidth. And so if someone only has, say, 5 megabits per second from Comcast, right? And so this is the bandwidth that people are asking for right away. So let's say that I was trying to do some HD video viewing, learning about mesh or something online, and I wanted to see it in high def because I want to see the guy's facial expressions. I don't want to see this, couple hundred kilobit grainy video. I own the network. I should be able to see whatever I want. Then my son tries to play Xbox, and my daughter or my wife is trying to watch Babbitt Hot or something, and someone else is trying to have a Skype call with the bled, and somebody's trying to do this, and suddenly everybody's complaining because everybody's using that bandwidth at that time, and there's nothing worse than video to suck up your network, because that's constant streaming of data. So once they start sucking that bandwidth out, everybody will start to complain, and then the video quality starts to come down. People started improving. They started talking to Netflix, for example. Hey, Netflix, we don't like this. We're going to kick all of your users off of our network. All the wireless guys, all the wireless networks were collaborating for a while and saying, you know what? We're going to tell the Netflix, everything Netflix, we're going to do an access control on this thing. We're going to do some deep packet inspection, and we're going to look and say, if we recognize this as Netflix traffic, we're going to shut it down. Because it kills the whole network. Imagine a guy, like I said, somebody sells users, and I've been to plenty of networks like this. Someone buys a base station, and the base station offers 40 megabits per second, right? A WiMAX base station, typical in the US at 3.65 gigahertz, 10 megahertz channel, could give you 45 megabits per second. That's if everything is perfect. That's if you have the best signal conditions, no interference, you can get 45 megabits per second. Then he starts throwing users on there. You start selling these packages, and you get 80 users on this network. If all 80 of those users were using just half a meg, you would run out of capacity if they were all using it at one time. But the trick is that not everybody's going to be using it, except when the kids come home from school. When the kids come home and the parents are home, about an hour after dinner, suddenly the phone lines light up. Why? Because you've got people starting to watch a movie, people starting to do all the things that we were talking about. And so it's a real life problem. So what they did, they said, the ones causing this problem is Netflix and those types of streamers. So they decided from now on, we will not allow more than a certain amount of total bandwidth we'll allow you to use. Not just we're going to control your rate, we're going to control the total bandwidth. So you're not allowed to download more than 5 gig a month. And if you do, that's a different package. You're going to try to come up with these different SLAs for people. Or another way they decided we're just going to block all Netflix traffic. And we're going to tell our users you are not allowed to use Netflix, no data streaming, because you can consume the whole pipe. Because if they had only 40 meg, and if you had 10 users each using, streaming a video at 4 meg, and the whole network is down. No one else. If they tried to use voice on this network, the voice quality would be horrible. And a lot of these guys are trying to sell what they call the triple play. They try to sell them, the voice video and internet service, right? And so when they try to do that, the guys who suffer the most and are the most sensitive are the voice calls, right? Immediately they'll start not be when they try to initiate a call, the call won't go through. And if the call does go through, it's very choppy. They can't understand what's going on, and the calls get dropped. And if it's a critical call, a lot of times what they do is they go to these houses and say, look, we can save you a lot of money. get rid of your home phone line. That's 60 bucks a month. We're only going to charge you 80, and we're going to give you voice, video, and data. So they ditched the home phone, and now suddenly they're relying on this VoIP, and it becomes a real big mess. And so when someone deploys these types of networks, they got to figure out what type of users do I have in terms of the real capacity that I want, the bandwidth per user that I'm going to demand here, and the latency requirements, which goes back into voice. You start thinking about those things before you start to deploy. So if it was just one Omni, I put my base station. It's an Omni, covers everybody. It's the cheapest solution because I just put up one base station and one antenna, and it covers everybody. When do people start to sectorize? They sectorize for 2 or 3 reasons. We'll just cover 2 of them. The first reason people sectorize is because they needed more capacity. So they said, okay, you know what, I'm going to cut this into sectors because my base station can only give me 50 meg, but I really need a lot more capacity. So I'm going to have, instead of 50 for the whole area,